Welcome to this Getting Started with SharePoint Framework Extension tutorial series. And in this tutorial, we are building our first field customizer extension. We're testing that in production in the SharePoint sites, and then we are deploying that directly to be used within a tenant. This is September 2018 edition, so we will keep on evolving both written and the video versions of these tutorials as we release newer versions of SharePoint Framework. Now let's actually jump right into it. So first of all, let's move to our command line, and in the command line I'm going to actually create the folder, which in this case is MD field extension. So we're going to create a folder for our solution, and let's actually create that one up. So and then we're going to execute the Yeoman generator for SharePoint Framework, and in here we obviously follow up on the written tutorials. So let's see, we want to use the default value of the solution name. We want to use SharePoint Online as the platform. We want to use the current folder because we're already at the field extension solution folder where we want to actually put the stuff. Now, in this case, we do not want to actually use the tenant scope deployment option for an extension. So extensions do support also tenant scope deployment, and using the tenant-wide deployment of extension capability, you would be able to enable extensions directly across multiple sites from a one centralized location, so from an app catalog site. In this case, our design, however, is our architectural design for this implementation is that we install this solution explicitly to a site to make the functionality work. So we're going to answer no on this question. And this is an extension. And this was the field customizer tutorial. So let's create a field customizer. Let's call this hello world, so we can use the default name and also the default description. And then we can choose if the field customizer is a JavaScript framework, no JavaScript framework, or a React. Now, important thing to remember, we keep on repeating this in every single tutorial. This is the default scaffolding option. It doesn't mean that Angular or Vue or whatever handlebars would not be supported. Not at all. It means that this is what you're getting as a starting point. So you can choose a React and you'll get a starting point example using React component. Just as well, you can choose no JavaScript framework and associate React or Angular or Vue or Ember or Handlebar or jQuery to your solution and start using those frameworks together with SharePoint Framework. So there are no limitations on that. Now that starts then the actual scaffolding of the solution. This will take a while, depending again on the on your computer, network bandwidth, and multiple other aspects. So let's speed up the video until the scaffolding is completed. Excellent, and now the scaffolding is completed, so we can actually open up the solution in a Visual Studio Code. So let's actually add their code or execute the code and dot, and that's if you have installed the Visual Studio Code using with the path entry, that will then start the Visual Studio Code directly. And as you can see, it's a field extension, but it obviously uses exactly the same default structure as any SharePoint Framework solution. So there's the config files there, there's the package JSON and SharePoint folders, and everything is there by default. Now the actual code of the field customizer is underneath the extensions, and we created an extension which name was hello world, and in here we can actually find the needed code. Now we have the manifest file which defines the actual extension. So here we can say component type is extension, it's a field customizer, that is the unique ID of the extension, and which we actually also need when we are doing debugging. Well, not precisely that much because the default settings are actually initially done, but if we have multiple field customizers in a single solution and we want to test them one by one against the live site, then you would need to have information about this ID model. Now let's actually go to the code level. So if we open up the code file here, we can see that the hello world field customizer is inherited. The base class extends base field customizer. We're getting those classes from the existing packages, so we get the baseline implementation from there. And there's a few things what's actually happening here. So if I scroll down, This is a field customizer. Field customizers at the time when we're recording this video are only for the read time experience, so basically on render cell. Potentially in the future this will be supported also on the edit experience, but for now it's only for read and render time. So this is the method which will be then called whenever we are actually rendering this field customizer on an existing field. So we associate this to a field, and then the field, when a field is being used, this is the method which is getting rendered. And in this case, we're taking a property entry from the property bag or the properties of the extension, and then we add that one in inner text with a additional text. We get the sample text property, and then we combine that with the field value, and we output that one as the inner text of the DOM element. So let's see that one in practice. So let's actually first test how do we debug this, and then we're going to slightly modify the code to make it slightly more prettier. Now let me actually go to a site which we're going to use for testing this. So first of all, we want to actually go to the site contents, and let's create a list for us which we're going to use for testing this functionality. So let's actually create a list. Let's call this list orders. And let's create the list on this SharePoint site. The next thing what we want to do is that we want to actually create a field on this list, which is a field type of number, and the name of the field will be %. That will also set the internal name of the field as %. So let's actually add that one on the list as well. Now, just to demonstrate the field rendering, we obviously need to have some content in here. So let's actually add a new item. Let's call this something really imaginary. So item A, and let's give it a % of 10%, % value of 10%, and let's call this then item B. And let's give it a value of 50. So you will see how the end result will be rendering this value slightly differently. And then the third one will be item C, and let's give it a number of 90. There we go. So now we have few items which we can use for testing. The next thing what we need to do is actually copy the URL of this list. So you want to copy the URL to the all items ASPX URL. So I'm going to copy that or request the URL without the additional extension or query parameters. So just double checking that the query is okay. So there we go, that's the URL. I'm gonna copy that one. I'm gonna move back to my Visual Studio Code solution. Then I'm gonna actually open a serve.json file, which is really convenient file helping us on debugging extensions underneath the config folder. And then I'm gonna actually replace the page URL of entry with the URL directly to the orders list, which we were just creating. And now you can actually see some additional things here as well. So we want to ensure that we activate this field customizer on the new field called %. So that means that in the field customizer section, we actually want to update that to be %. The ID here refers to the manifest ID of the field customizer, and that is by default correct because we provisioned or scaffold one field customizer to a single solution. If you would have multiple ones in a single solution, then you would have to modify these settings after that. And then we have the sample text, which is value right now, so as a property for the field customizer. Cool. So let's actually save the settings. Let's go back on to console level. And in here, I'm going to clear up something, clear the view, and then I'm going to do gulp serve. And gulp serve will now start that field customizer in the URL which we added on the serve.json. And the first things first, it's going to actually say, hey, do you really want to load the manifest file and the JavaScript files from a local host? And because we're developers, we say obviously yes. And we can actually then see dynamically our on-premises hosted, local hosted JavaScript file getting rendered, and the % value is over there. So we're basically adding that value prefix on the % field in the field rendering. So we're combining this text to that actual value of the field. So relatively simple scenario, but this proves that we're running the custom code on top of the list from our own custom field customizer. Good. So let's actually modify this slightly. So let's actually get back on the on our code. So you don't actually have to stop the command line, or you could if you want to do that. So I can actually, let's terminate that one, so we get a new time again, a tab open whenever we start debugging the file again. Now in the field customizer entry, let's actually modify this entry slightly. So let's actually modify the cell entry, and let's add a full style here as well. So we'll have a hello world main style here, and then that's going to be the cell, and that's going to be a full style, which we're going to use actually within the code. Now in the code itself, we do some small modification on the onRender cell. So let's actually modify the onRender cell slightly based on the written tutorial what we have, and in here we then take advantage of the styles and full, styles and hello world, and styles and cell value. So basically what we're doing here is we're rendering div based on the field value width, and then we render that in a slightly different way. You'll see in a second how this actually looks in practice. Now, small modification. Let's get back on our code. Let's do gulp serve. And that's going to again start this window again. Well, actually, there we go. So we want to load the debug scripts, and now we're heading on the page. I did a refresh on our browser, so it got actually slightly confused. Let me do this one more time. Load the scripts, and there we go. Now we're able to see the field value rendered slightly differently. So we render the indication, the value inside of the how many percent is actually the value from the full 100%. Really simple implementation, absolutely. And technically, you could actually make these kind of things happen also using the new column formatting capability, except the column formatting is something what the end user can modify. If you're associating a field customizer to a field, it is there and nobody can take it away. Plus, field customizer supports running actual JavaScript, so you could have buttons here and actions happening if you need to. So that's really the difference between column formatting and field customizer. Now, okay, so that works. So we know that our really, in quotes, complex implementation is now working properly. Now, the next thing what we want to do is actually get this field customizer deployed to the site as part of a new custom field. So we want to package this field customizer and associate that dynamically to an existing field on the site or a new field on the site. So let's actually go back on the Visual Studio side. I'm going to again pause the execution of the local host. Let's close the code. Code is ready to go. That was fast. So let's close the config folder. Let's close the code folder. Let's leave that one slightly open and have a look on what we have inside of the SharePoint folder. In here, you can see a default elements XML file, which actually has an example entry already. And this is really to show you what you can do and an example configuration for you to take advantage. So in here, the elements XML file is defining that we will actually provision a field whenever the SBPKG file, the solution file, is getting installed on a site. And that field is going to be part of SPFX columns. The name of the field will be SPFX percentage, and the display name will be percentage. It will be a number of type of number, minimum is 100, required is false, and the client-side component ID, the most important part, is actually the same ID which we are actually mapping in the manifest ID. So you can actually see now the manifest ID here for our custom field customizer is mapping with the element XML file in here. So the client-side component ID is matching that. And that's going to then on runtime basically tell SharePoint that whenever this field will be rendered anywhere within that site, we will render that client-side component as part of the field. Now, in this case, we don't actually have any property values for the client-side component, so we don't have that entry in this field element. But just as well, if you would like to parameterize that entry, so that would be client-side component properties, which would be then setting if your client-side component would actually have some properties which we need to walk through or set. So in this case, we don't have that, so we don't actually have to worry about getting that thing included inside of our package. Cool. The next thing also, what we want to double check and confirm is that this element XML file, because we want to install the solution explicitly to a site, we want to provision this field whenever the solution is getting installed to a site, it is actually included in the solution package. And that one we can actually see from the package solution JSON file. Inside of this one, we're defining what is the solution package, what is the version of it, and also what kind of features include to that package. And in here, as an example, we're saying that the elements manifest includes elements XML file. So this entry has to be here to make sure that that element XML file gets inside of the SPPKG file. Good. Now, in this case, we will use also the include client-side assets equals true option. And this also means that all of our JavaScript files, which are as an output of the solution, will be encapsulated or included inside of the solution as well. So we can actually ship this right away, and the assets and everything else will be automatically hosted for us, either using Office 365 CDN or using URL inside of the app catalog site collection. And let me show this one in practice. So let me actually go to the command line like we actually do in the written tutorial. So let me actually clear this one. So we want to do gulp bundle, and we're going to do ship because we're already ready to go. We tested that the functionality works. We could do some additional testing, but I think we're fine. So all of the files seem to be fine. We're ready to go. We want to ship this. We don't want to run localhost as a requirement for making things happen. So there's the gulp bundle ship, and let's do also gulp package solution. If I can write and ship, so that's going to be then included, and that's going to then create the field extension SPPKG file. So now we can actually see that the file was created inside of the SharePoint solution folder. And there was a new solution folder created, and here we go, there is the file. So now if I right click this one and say reveal from Explorer, I can actually get just that solution file available and visible in my file explorer. Now, the next thing, obviously what we want to do is to get this one installed and available in our tenant. So let's actually go to the solution folder, drag and drop the solution inside of the tenant in my app catalog site. Because we prepared this one for production usage, it actually says, where are we? It actually says that the domain is SharePoint Online. So we dynamically use either the CDN URL or the URL inside of that, or pointing to the app catalog of the tenant. So that is fine. We want actually this to get deployed. There we go, refreshed. It is deployed, yes. Not a tenant deployed, no errors. We are basically good to go. So now let's actually go to our site collection, or let's go to our site where we want to actually test this, where we previously already created the orders list. So here we go. Now in site contents, we can see the orders on the left menu. And if we have a look on the orders in the left menu, obviously because we're not in the debug mode. Now that's already showing something historical. So let me actually get back on the refresh. There we go. Now we're in a clear moment. So now if I click orders list, we are in the list. We can see that there's no customizations in here because we're not running anything in a debug mode, which we did as part of this tutorial for testing the field customizer. Now we want to install this solution now available within the site. So we're going to go add an app. And we're going to choose the field customizer client-side extension to get installed. There we go. And that's now getting installed on the site. So we need to wait a while. And what happens right now is that the features inside of the SPPKG file are getting activated. SharePoint reads the element XML file. It reads that, oh, this contains a field entry. So I'm going to create the field inside of this list, inside of the site. So it will be available to be used by the end users, or available to be used in a list which you want inside of this site. So getting the application installed, solution installed, it slightly depends on the timing because it is an async operation. But now we can see that the solution is available within the site. So let's actually create a new list, which we're gonna call this time as invoices. So let's actually call that or add that list to the site, invoices, just to make it separate from the orders list, which was there as well. Now, the easiest way to get to the invoices settings, or the list settings, is to go to the site contents page, and then from here select the settings of the list, because now we want to have that field which is predefined to use the field customizer associated to the list. So we actually have it there by default without any debug parameters, without any debugging settings. So now from a drop-down, if you go to the SPFX columns, we can actually see our percentage column. Depending again what kind of site collection or which site collection you're using, you might have other settings here as well. These actually are from the tutorial related on a web part deployment. So if you're using the same site collection, in this case you might see the amount and cost center or not. But the percentage is the one which we're interested. Let's click that one. Let's click OK. That's going to be associated now to the invoices list, and it has that client-side component ID entry pointing to the same manifest ID, which is now ready to get served from the app catalog. So basically, and in the app catalog side, when I'm getting stuff served, we kind of check if the CDN is enabled, and we're going to either serve it from the CDN, or we can serve that directly from the app catalog site collection. Cool. Column is there, percentage is there, we're ready to go. Let's go to the invoices list. And 1, 2, 3, there we go. Let's add a new item to this list, so we can actually see, hopefully, the right component ID activating. So let's call this invoices A, and let's give it a number like 40. And now, because the client-side component ID is associated automatically at the field level, you can see that the rendering of the column is by default activating and using the field customizer. The same thing applies, obviously. It doesn't matter if you're adding here invoices B, and let's give it a 60 or 70 or whatever number. So adding as many items here as well. So we're using always the field customizer now, and it's not coming in from a local host, because our local host isn't actually running. It is coming from the CDN in our case, because we have enabled Office 365 CDN. If the Office 365 CDN, which is free, is not enabled in your tenant, it's going to serve the content directly from the app catalog site collection URL. So everything is anyway automatic for you, so you don't have to worry about where the JavaScript files are actually getting served. But that's it. That's for all we're going to do in this tutorial. So we created a field customizer. We tested how we can debug that. We added some custom code to it. We tested that one out. We packaged the field customizer, and eventually we actually got it deployed as a, in quotes, production-ready functionality to our tenant, so we are able to use it directly within sites. So that's all for this one. Thank you for watching.